What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. Today we're going to be doing our weekly email Q&A. Now, if you want to be part of this series, send all your questions to fishofhex@gmail.com. And if you could be so kind, if you have multiple questions, instead of a long drawn-out paragraph, just go ahead and number them. It makes it very easy to kind of move them over to my template for this Q&A. So yeah, if you have multiple questions, I don't care how many they are or how maybe simple you think they are or basic they are, it doesn't matter. If you have questions, send them to there and title it email Q&A, and I'll make sure I'll take care of those in these types of videos. All right, so let's go and get started. Now, the first question we have here is, hey, a big fan of the channel. Quick question for you. What time during the day do you dose? Acro power, lights on, off, etc. And I mentioned that I dose it in my previous video about the 300. I mentioned that I dose it twice a week, which is a Wednesday and Sunday. Now, when it comes to the time, I usually do it in the morning. I turn off the skimmer, as I mentioned in that video, and I dose it in the morning while the lights are ramping up, and then I turn the skimmer on probably 6 or 8 hours later, just given the fact that I don't want it to immediately pull out anything that I dose into the tank, because not only do I dose the acro power, but I also dose the fuel, the iodine, as well as the potassium. So those are the things that I dose on top of the acro power. Now, I really don't think it matters what time you dose the product. I would just more or less focus on the consistency of the dosing as well as the amount. Make sure you're either under the recommended or at the recommended amount, and that you're not overdosing any type of supplement that you're adding to the tank. All right, so moving on to the next question. 5 months ago, when I had an ick outbreak, I had lost 6 fish, but I got the remaining in quarantine and copper treated them, etc., and put the tank through a 5-month fallow period. 4 weeks ago, when I started adding the fish back into the tank, the past week, the sailfin and the scopus have been displaying symptoms of ick and or white spots. They have spots on them which disappear and reappear. The sailfin has rapid breathing and is acting strange. Do I wait to see if their immune systems can beat it, or do I tear down the tank apart and put them back in quarantine? If I do this, I will shut the display tank down and restart. Now, there was something during that whole time, either in the fallow period or the quarantine period, that did not kill the parasite. Now, if there was something in the tank that was living, maybe you forgot a fish, maybe a small chromis or something that was just living in the rocks that you never saw, that was kind of feeding that parasite and never went through the fallow period, and that could be the reason. Now, talking about the display tank here, there are some instances where the ick parasite, I said pick parasite, that's kind of weird. The ick parasite will not die in that fallow period, that 8 to 10 weeks. Sometimes with velvet as well, there's just stronger strands of it that require a longer fallow period. Now, again, 8 to 10 weeks is already a long time to go without fish. I've done it before. It's just one of those things that really makes you want to quarantine in the future, and I've stressed that probably 100 times on this video, on this channel. And so basically, something in the display tank was feeding the parasite, so it did not die. Or you didn't do the proper treatment of ick in quarantine. Now, the fish might have not have shown any signs, but the ick parasite will live in the gills there, and that's where you're getting that rapid breathing from on the sailfin, because it's in his gills. And maybe you did have copper in the system, but you didn't have enough, or you didn't have them in copper long enough, and in turn it just kind of sent the ick parasite in dormant because they weren't really stressed out, so it didn't show up. And maybe that's why they're showing signs now, is you never properly treated for it in quarantine. Now, when I have a fish that comes in and it has ick, or I get it from like a client or somebody that had ick, or kind of, I'm starting with somebody who had that issue, my fish go into quarantine and they get a half a dose of cupramine for the first 3 days, and then I put them up to the recommended amount per the water volume of that quarantine tank. Now, they'll stay in that for the recommended 2 weeks, and then I'll do a 50% water change and get them down to about 50% copper, and I'll run that straight through for 6 weeks. Whenever a fish has ick, it automatically stays in for 6 weeks. There is no 4-week quarantine. If they come in from like a transshipper and they never showed any signs of ick, 4 weeks is good for me, as with the copper as well. But if they've ever shown signs of ick, they always go for 6 weeks minimum with the proper copper treatment. And if you have any doubts about the copper treatment, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and do hypo, but don't do both at the same time. That's not going to work out very well. And yeah, so basically, we kind of ran through what the possibilities were of why you're seeing ick now. Now, what I would personally do if this was my system and it's going to depend on your budget and what your resources are here. But I would remove all the fish because you really just, if their immune system's taking care of it, it doesn't really matter. It's going to pop up here and there. If you add new fish, they might not be strong enough to deal with it. So you'd be picking off fish and wasting money and ultimately wasting your time. So I would remove all the fish. And if it was my tank, I would just run fallow again, but for an extended amount of time. Ensure that there's nothing in there. I'd even take the snails out. I'd take out all inverts. I'd take out anything that's living in that tank. Look for fish, anything you might have missed, and let it run fallow for even longer. And then, of course, treat the fish in quarantine properly with copper or hyposalinity. And that's what I would do. But if you have the resources and you have the money you want to spend, you could always remove all the rock, remove all the sand, fill the tank up with fresh water, let it run for about a week, and then you could always cure new rock. Like for me, I would use Pucani, so I would have to cure that rock again, which then takes time, 2 or 3 months to cure it properly. Again, depending on your resources, you might have access to already cured rock, and then you can start the system over, but you need to still do that 4 to 6 weeks quarantine for the fish. So you definitely have plenty of time to decide what you want to do, and it's just a learning lesson. From this point forward, I guarantee you'll never put a fish in the tank again without properly quarantining, and I think we all learned that lesson at one point in the hobby. All right, so the next question here is, what's a good source for rock? I'm starting a Nuval Lagoon 25 for my first reef ever. If you have a place, would be much appreciated. Now, you guys know I'm a big fan of Pucani, which I mentioned previously. And if you're just starting out and you're on a budget, granted, Pucani isn't really much more expensive than, say, your Reef Saver rock, but it does require a little bit more curing time and a process to make sure that it's good, so you can put it in your reef tank, which I just mentioned kind of in the previous answer. So Reef Saver rock from Bulk Reef Supply is definitely a good source. You're still going to want to cure it one way or another, and to make sure that it's good to go, because there are still some detritus and nutrients within that rock, and you want to build up that beneficial bacteria. But if you want to kind of look for long-term success with good beneficial bacteria populations, you're going to want to go with that lighter rock, more porous rock like Pucani. And again, you're going to want to cure that prior to putting it in your tank. All right, so the next question here is, what is the green LPS you sold? Been wondering what type that was. It is a Lobo, and that's the closest I can find to it. The marine biologist at the local fish store here in Lancaster said that it was a Lobo of some sort, but they couldn't identify the specific name of it. And yes, I sold that to a client, JP. You guys will see his tank here in the future. The whole build is pretty much done. We're just adding coral, and it's just doing really, really well, actually. And so you guys will see that tank here soon. And it's really cool. It's going to be at a client's house. I can check it out whenever I want. And the reason why I got rid of it, I just wanted to put something else in its place. I like how big it is in the tank, but it seems to be just not going well with my current aquascaping theme. So it's sold, and we'll be putting something else in its place. All right, next question here is, how do you lower DKH? That would explain why all my SPS pale then die. DKH is going to be your alkalinity level. Like currently in the 300 gallon I run at about 9.0, and I'm trying to get it down to 8.5. And that's because I'm having really low phosphates, and you don't want to have a mixture of high DKH and low phosphates. So while I'm trying to get my phosphates up, it wouldn't hurt to bring that DKH down to 8.5. And it's pretty simple. You're gonna watch your alkalinity. You're gonna test it a couple times during the week. For example, when I'm monitoring my alkalinity closely, I'll test it on Wednesday and test it on Sunday, and then make any adjustments based off of those readings. Now, if you're dosing something like 2-part, and you're trying to keep up with the demand of the tank, you're just going to simply reduce the amount you dose. So if you're dosing 30 milliliters a day to keep a 9.5 DKH, you're going to want to go down to 25 milliliters a day, and then let it slowly decrease, because the coral are going to still pull out what they're requiring to grow. And if you're not kind of keeping up with that demand to keep at that 9.5, it will gradually come down. Of course, you don't want to be cutting your dosing in half. You don't want to go from 30 to 15 and then expect your tank to react good to that. So reducing the amount of 2-part you dose, and if you're not dosing 2-part, and if you're using a calcium reactor, same thing, dial back a little bit. And if you're not doing any kind of dosing and your alkalinity is still high, look at your salt. So if you're using a salt with a 10 or 11 alkalinity or DKH, in the salt, you're going to maybe want to switch to something else that has a lower alkalinity level. For example, the Fritz RPM that I use that has a 9 DKH, and that's pretty good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you just want to do water changes to keep it at 9 DKH, you should be good to go. Now understand there are other factors besides DKH that will determine your SPS being pale. Maybe your lighting's too high. Again, maybe not enough nutrients in the tank. And if you combine high lighting, low nutrients, and high alkalinity, there's a good chance your acropore SPS won't be as happy as they could be. So just take those other elements into consideration. All right, next question here. Do you think the Majano wand would take care of green star polyps? I have some stray ones popping up around the tank. I don't know. Let's go over to the frag tank and look at a GSP frag and see if it works. And by the way, I'm recording this before I actually go over to the tank, so here's your answer. All right, so the next question here is, I've got a 210 gallon that I've been adding stock to. I have been trying to go with the least aggressive fish first and increasing the aggression as they complete quarantine. I've got a few wrasses in quarantine now. The next group of fish for the 210 will be dwarf angels. Last group will be tangs. I also have a 50-gallon cube. The main fish in this tank is a clown tang. He's about 4 inches. Initially, I wanted to put him in the 210, but I think he may outgrow the 50-gallon before I'm ready to introduce tangs to the 210. I also think he'll be too big and will bully the other fish. Thoughts? Well, he's obviously going to outgrow that 50-gallon real quick, so I would take him out, put him in quarantine, and then put him into the 210. Now, when it comes to him being aggressive and bullying, I think that the clown tangs are kind of like the hippo tang. They do have the same facial structure, and I don't find them to be as aggressive as like a yellow tang or a scopus or even a powder blue tang. Now, one thing you want to take in consideration is when you start introducing other tangs to that tank, you want to stay away from this same facial structure to help with the aggression. Also, get tangs that are really close to his size. Now, if he's going to be, 7 or 8, 9 inches by the time you plan on adding other tangs, I would maybe look into selling him first, or wait until you add some other tanks, because you're not going to want to go out and spend money on tangs that are 8, 9 inches. It's just not going to be something you're going to want to spend on, trust me. So maybe introduce a couple smaller tanks, 4 or 5 inches, to the tank with him, and also, adding multiple tanks at one time will help. See how the aggression is. If he starts being a jerk or bullying, maybe you want to consider taking him out, selling him to somebody with a bigger tank or with bigger fish, and introducing more tanks that are around the size of that 4 to 5, 6 inches, because they are cheaper, and you can get away with kind of adding more of them at one time. All right, so just take that in consideration, but I would definitely remove him from the 50-gallon, as he's probably not going to be happy in that tank for much longer. All right, next question. Travis, what are those brackish fish with the yellow fins called? Please let me know. Here's your answer popping up on the screen. Next question. How do you keep the blue starfish alive? I can never keep them longer than a week. Well, a lot of people keep asking me about the blue starfish, and that is the original Linkia that I added to the 125, I think 2 years ago. Yeah, it's probably about 2 years now. And it really comes down to stable water parameters. You don't want big fluctuations. Now, I don't feed him anything. He just does his own thing on the rock, and it could just be luck. I mean, the one I had before lasted a long time too. It's just kind of, you just don't want him out of the water for a long time. You don't want to switch him between systems, and you want to keep a stable tank and a proper salinity level. About 1.025 is and 1.026 is where I keep my tanks at. And I've been just successful with them. Again, I don't feed them anything, and they just seem to be doing pretty good. I know that's not really a great answer, but it's just basic stuff that keeps them alive, really, for me. All right, next question here. I notice you have filter socks on your 300-gallon. What are the benefits of using them? I mentioned this when I was setting up the tank during the whole mini-series there. Filter socks have been something that I've always run on bare-bottom tanks because I use the power heads to aid in the filtration of detritus. So the power heads will kick on, spit up the detritus into the water column. It'll, of course, go into the overflow and then down into the filter socks. Now, I find that the tank is a lot clearer with filter socks. You don't have to clean the sump out nearly as much. And the only pain is, of course, changing them out every week. Right now, I change out 4 filter socks twice a week on the 300 and then 2 filter socks twice a week on the frag system. Now, of course, you have to have a lot of filter socks backed up to be able to clean them once or twice every couple months. And if you want to make your own, I have a video on how you can make your own. But for my particular application right now, I can't make my own. And I just really like having them. They really help keep the tank nice and clear, keeps the detritus out of the water column. And if you catch any food particles, again, it's not sitting in the sump rotting. It's just in the filter socks. When they start filling up, I just simply change them out and put them in a bucket and, again, clean them every 1 or 2 months. Alright, so it looks like we have about 4 questions left. This one is, how do I know if my acropora are not happy? Now, one thing about acroporas, they'll definitely tell you via the polyp extension, specifically the millipora. If you're not getting good polyp extension on an acropora, it's a good indication that it's not happy. Also, paling out is obviously an indication that the zooxanthellae are kind of expelling themselves from the tissue there. Again, it's not good for the coral. Doesn't necessarily mean it's dying until you start getting that RTN kind of stuff. That's really a bad sign. But what I would say is, if you're putting an acro in a tank and the polyps are not out within the first 24 hours, or kind of it doesn't look generally happy with polyps out, then I would look at flow, lighting, nutrient control, and also double check all your parameters to kind of see. And you want to see where the acropora is coming from. And that's why I like to mention what I'm running here in my frag tanks, as well as my 300 gallon. So when people want to buy acros, they know where they should be targeting. So if you're running a system at 7 DKH all the time, and you want to start adding acropora, buying them from a tank that has 9.5 or 10 DKH might be too big of a jump for that particular acropora, given depending on the species. Now, I've found that millipora are a little bit more forgiving than the standard acropora because there really isn't as much flesh that can be kind of RTNing off there, but it's still going to kill it if it's not the proper water parameter. So again, polyp extension, if that's not out, if it's starting to pale, you might want to check all the things I mentioned previously and make some adjustments if needed. All right, the next question here is, will you be selling any of the anemones from the 30-gallon tank? Once they finish splitting and the rock structure is kind of full of the anemones, yes, I will be selling them, but not anytime soon, so sorry about that. Next question here is, how often do you clean the Nios skimmer on your 300? Well, I cleaned it 7 or 8 months ago when I introduced it to that sump, and I have yet to clean it. Again, the filter socks really help keep the rest of the sump clean, and I have to do a review on this skimmer, but it's running for over a year now, and it is definitely doing very, very well. A very powerful skimmer with those 2 pumps in there. And I will be cleaning it here probably in the next 3 or 4 months, and I'll show you guys that whole process and probably do the review at that point. Now, our final question here is, when will you be doing the first veterans tank build? Now, I'm working with a couple companies here to get tanks sponsored, and you guys have to realize that the donations that I'm getting, yes, I'm getting some equipment donated, but the majority of the funds are coming through me personally based off of coral sales. So 10% of all coral sales go into a savings account, which then I will use that money. So right now, with the coral sales, since I introduced the program, we're at about $1,500 from that 10% into that account. So it's not a huge amount, but it is definitely enough to kind of work something out here. Now, depending on when the sponsors come through and when those tanks are done being built, will kind of determine when we do those builds, but I might actually do something like an all-in-one or something that's a little bit cheaper, just to kind of get our first build out there. So that's something I'm looking about doing here, because we can do an all-in-one system for probably under $1,000. So I have the money right now to actually go out and get that tank ready, but how many veterans out there want an all-in-one system that's going to be under like 30 gallons? So I really wanted to give people like 100-gallon tanks, 200-gallon tanks. That's really what I wanted to give people, but I'm all about figuring it out. So hopefully within the next few months, we'll at least get some sort of build out there. Again, the more coral sales that come in, the more money I can put aside for this program. Again, I am a one-man show running everything here, and it just, of course, takes some time. So hopefully that answers your questions. If you guys have any more questions, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, send them to fishofhex@gmail.com and title it Weekly Q&A. So until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.